Hi everyone, welcome back to our second lesson. I hope the last lesson was helpful to get you started. It's really good to see your assignments come true and most of you have done a great job. I'm gonna review all of them and get back to you individually. This lesson is very important, but it's not difficult at all. So we're gonna, use layman term and then use practical examples and then try and understand them. So pay special attention for this lesson especially and try to go slow, okay? I'll be providing lots of tips and tricks and introduce you to many new things today. So as we proceed, I'll encourage you to pause the video and type out all the codes that I'll be showing you yourself. Try it out yourself, and that's the only way actually to get familiar with the syntax, the environment, like the properties, objects, methods, and all this, okay? So you should definitely pause the video and type out all the codes yourself. Before we begin, let's take a quick look at what we have learned so far. So first we have learned how to write a sub procedure called greet users, and then this basically just return hello to the user who is currently logged in, and this returns the application username. This is an example of a function we went through. Similarly, application version, we've learned various ways to refer to workbook. One is by the position or index, one is by the name. The workbook has already been saved, and then the workbook that is not saved yet. This workbook refers to the workbook where we are writing the code. Active workbook refers to the workbook that we are currently in, or cursor is in. So this is the active workbook now, and if you move it here, this is the active workbook. And coming down here, similarly for the sheets, we've learned how to refer it by position, by the name, how to activate it, how to refer by the ID or by by the caption or by the label. Similarly for the range, coming down here, we've learned how to use this, the square brackets, and then the object name goes here. We learn how to read from that as well. And here another way to refer to the range will be using the cells method, where you can specify the row and the column. Similarly, read and write here, and then coming down here, referring it by the address of the range, specifying the string, and then you can definitely go further by putting more range here. So we have gone through this as well. We have learned how to use offset, how far we want to offset away from the particular range. Let's say we want to offset from this particular range, how far up we want to go, or how far down, how far right or left, for example, from that particular position. And we have even used this in our project. And here's how we implemented, like activating the workbook, going to the specific sheet, and then writing a value to that particular range. Similarly, for the same this 3 lines of code, we shrink it down to a single line of code, alternative way of writing it. And then we learn a couple of other methods, how to copy, paste, special, and all this. And then we did a project where we directly write to a particular range, specific range. And then second, we learn how to loop through, identify the last row with the data, for example, last row with the data, and then we write a value there. That is also what we have learned, and learn how to read and write, how to refer to a named range, and then return the execution status with the time. And then we've learned a couple of other things, how to loop through and all this. Let's start off today's lesson by learning what are variables and how we can use them to make our program more dynamic and robust. Variables basically are the names that we give to computer memory location. You can pass a value to be stored there, and then you can read from that particular location later on by using these variable names. Once we do few examples, you'll be able to relate to it much better. Let me go back to our editor, and I'll just replicate this part of the code. Okay, I'm gonna insert a new module, and let's call this version 2, and I'll get rid of this for now. Okay, so just to demonstrate this, I'll say variables examples. Okay, so in order to So the official word that we use is declare. Okay, to set up the variable, we have to declare it. And the syntax to do that is you have to specify dim. Okay, after that you specify the name of your variable. Okay, it can be anything that makes sense to you. So let's say that we want to assign from our project, from the form, we want to assign a value from here, which is client. So I'm just gonna say dim v client as, and then you specify the data type here. So do you want to store the text data? Do you want to store dates? Do you want to store numbers? If numbers, is this currency, or like all these things. So we'll do more examples. So for the text, I'm going to specify string. Okay, so here I've declared a variable that is going to be used only within this code. Okay, and then to set a value, you can just say vClient is equal to, and then you can specify, for example, Amanda, something like that. And now we have already assigned a value called Amanda to this memory location, a variable. And if you have to read from here, you can say message box this, right? This is how you can read. Let's put it down here. And if I run this now, says Amanda. For example, if I just copy this code from this, read from this range, from this sheet, from this range. So if I copy this code and put here instead of Amanda, so whatever value that you put in here will be passed to this variable. Okay, so it says error. Now if we have to implement in this particular code, we can declare the like all the variables at the top here. And so since it's the same thing, I'll just copy it. Let's say we want to declare 4 variables. One is string, this two will be string, this is gonna be date, this is gonna be currency amount. Now I'm gonna show you a table where there is like all this data type after we do this small example. Let's call the second one maybe T date to represent the transaction date, and the data type is gonna be date here. And then for the third one, it's gonna be amount. Let's say T amount for transaction amount as. So especially when you're using currency, if the amount, the number that is there is to represent money or currency, there's a special data type for that. So you use currency for this. And then this is gonna be string. Okay, so now here we have declared variables. This is how you'll declare variables. And once we have to assign a value, I'm gonna copy the entire code and put it here just for 1 second. And this one is gonna be Control-J vClient. Okay, it doesn't show there. Okay, just gonna copy and paste here. And then second one is gonna be vDate. This one is gonna be, the amount is gonna be from the amount, and then this is gonna be client type. Okay, so now we have declared 4 variables here, and then we have set values to these 4 variables by reading the form which we have built here, right? So client, pdate, amount, and client type. Okay, so we have done this part. Now we have set a value. Set value to variables. Okay, now I'll just keep this part as it is, but once we reach here, instead of reading from the form, now we can read from this variable. Okay, now one thing you could ask here is why do we need to use variable when we can directly assign a value here? Now this is one way of utilizing variables. There are so many other purposes which we have not started looking into it yet. just try to understand how to declare variables, how to set a value, and how to read from it for now. So now if I run this code, it's still gonna yield the same result. Okay, let me put in another name and submit. So here it produces the same result. Okay, so that's how we can use a variable. Now if I have to just demonstrate this by going through line by line. So once we pass here, see, we can see Amanda has been passed here, the T date and the amount, and then you see there is type A assigned. And then once you come here, just give me 1 second. Where is the workbook? Okay, here it is. So looping. Okay, so I need to rerun this part. F8. So starting to loop here, as you can see. And now it's gonna activate the and then add the information like that. Okay, now as soon as the the process completed, as soon as this particular sub procedure is complete, the value that is set here is gone now. So if I Control G and try to print this out here in the immediate window, the value is gone. Okay, so the scope of these variables are just within this particular procedure at the moment. Now there will come a time when you want to read when you want these variables to be accessible from all the all the modules and all the class, okay, all the other objects. So for that you can use one is public and then constant. This one is when you use this constant, you assign a variable which the value will not change. Okay, so constant, and then you put maybe like application name as string is equal to, let's call this application as Excel app. Now this will be accessible from all the modules, okay, like this. For example, let's say that we have another module here and this code is to do something, and message box, you can like call this, yeah, or we can say I'm just gonna copy our initial code and bring it here. Every time you pass an normally what I do, like I create a constant variable like this, and then I like show it up in a message box every time there is some notification. So here, for example, I can say exclamation VB exclamation. That will be the type of message box, and then comma, here's the title that you can put. In the title I normally show the app name like that. So if I run this code now, it's gonna say hello Elpamai, and then the app name is up there. So if you do not specify this part, if I comment this out, normally it will be just Microsoft Excel. So you can show your app name there. This can be also maybe information. So here you can see like the message box type has changed, right? So that's how you can utilize as well. Maybe like you can also use constant variables to store, like where you save the settings at the later stage when you develop, like a more complex application. You might want to read the user settings from certain places and all this. So you can specify all the constant variables, all the variables that are not gonna change. Okay, maybe the password, it could be the email ID or the URL that you want the user to navigate if there is some issues, and so on. So we'll do more examples as we go on. And the other one is the one we're talking about, public variables. Like here, all these variables that we've declared is just for this particular process. Okay, if there's any other function that we are going to call, we can pass these values, but then like the scope is just within this particular process. Now if you want the variable to be accessible from all these other processes, then you'll have to declare a public variable. So we can say, if it is not constant variable, then we can say like, let's take one example. Let's say that application username redundant. Maybe just use the same example for now. Like if I copy this v client here, I'm just gonna say v, just to keep it different, v client as string. Okay, now if you put a public variable like this, this particular value will be accessible from any code. So for example, let's say that you are running a code, this you are setting a value here. Okay, let's say you set a value like this, and I run this. Let me just run this first. Okay, and if I try to print this now, this value is still there in the memory. Okay, so if other process runs it, it will be able to read it from here. Okay, so once we start utilizing this, like doing more practical example, then we will come across a scenario where we can use this. Okay, later on, like when we do the variables with array and all this, then all this are gonna come together. Okay, now before we go ahead, let's take a look at the data type that we've used here. This is a data type summary table. It's, like everything that you're learning in this lesson, for example, be it like data type and all these things, are universal with any programming that you're going to be doing, be it .NET or C#, Python or any other programming you do. These things remain the same. Okay, the concept and everything remain the same. So for example, so far we've used string. Okay, so here is string, and then these are like approximately how many characters can go in there, length of string, for example. And then we've used date. For date, this much of memory is going to be used, for example, and here this is the date that you can assign to that particular variable. If anything goes beyond this, then it's going to give an error. Just to demonstrate that, let me write one small code here. Okay, we can just reuse this. Let's say that dim x number as byte. So byte can handle only number up to 255. Okay, now if I say my number is equal to 2, and I'll just say x number is printing 2. Okay, now if I put this 255, it'll still give us, but the moment I do 256, it's gonna give overflow. That basically means that like this is beyond like what it can handle. Okay, so if you work with variables at the later stage and you come across overflow error, then you just come to know that, okay, maybe for this number or whatever you're doing, you can use maybe currency that can handle this much of, how much is this, well, that's a huge number, so it can handle a lot of numbers. So you can go for currency, you can go for double can handle lots of decimal points, as you can see here, and then integer can handle only from like 32,000 minus 32,000 to positive 32,000 approx, and long can also handle a lot of number, but these are, if you can see here, these are only for positive numbers. So when you are dealing with currency, especially with money, do not use integer or long. Maybe I'll show you an example where you'll be using this absolute numbers, and then we'll talk about these variables like long and all this. These are specifically for 64-bit platforms. I'll we'll go deeper into that at a later stage. If you do not specify a number, data type, the code will automatically assign a variant to it. So meaning like if I use a like dim dummy variable as, for example, you just say dim and then you just put it like that, or you don't even assign anything like that, okay, and you directly set a value, like something like that. In that sort of scenarios, what the program is going to do is it's going to assign a variant to that, and the first number that you assign to it will be taken as like the data type that you want to use, okay. And then we can also use user-defined variable type. Okay, so just before we go in there, I want to demonstrate some more examples, because this part is actually very important as and will help you to construct dynamic range. We'll start you can even like create object variables. So these are all gonna come very, very handy. So I'm gonna give you a couple of more examples to get you well versed and very familiar with variables. Now let me do one thing. Let me show you how to dynamically identify. Let me close this first. Let me show you how to identify the code. Identify the last row with the data, and then instead of looping it down, we will write a value there. Okay, now the loop that we have learned here, it's very useful. Okay, it will present you many scenarios where you have to use this, but in this particular scenario, just imagine you have like 40-50,000 rows of data. You have to keep looping and identify, and then like every time you have to add a record. That may be not very efficient. So we will directly identify what should be the last row with the data, and then we'll write a data just below that. Okay, so normally the way to approach, there are multiple ways to do it. One of the way I do it is I go to the last end of the data here. Okay, so for example, if I need to get, let me organize a bit. If I want to get the total rows count, I can go here and I can print it out, rows dot count. This will be the rows count. So if you're dynamically constructing, you can use this instead of using a specific hard-coded row number like this. So for example, if I say range and I'm concatenating it, and then I'll see rows.count dot select. Now if I put my cursor here and I run this code like this, it goes down here. Okay, so that way I know that it has this many rows, and then from this particular location we can use and method. So once we use and, we can specify from this particular range, we can specify to actually it's telling us the direction where you want to go. So do you want to go to the end up, or you want to go end to the like end of this column, for example, or let's say your range is here, do you want to go this way to the left? So we can point to this direction. So in this scenario we want to go up. Okay, so up and then dot draw. Okay, now if I print this, or maybe first I can select just for demonstration. Now if I run this, it goes and select this. Okay, now if I want to return the row number, instead of select, I can just say row. This will return 14. Now if I copy this down further, now the code is going to return 18. Okay, so 18 is returned, and if I get rid of all this, it will return 9. It should return 9. Okay, so that's how you can identify what should be the last cell with the data, and then you can append the data right beneath it. Append means add the data. Okay, now I'm gonna replicate this block of code so that you can refer to it later. I'm gonna add another module. You can add many modules, that shouldn't be a problem. And now I'm gonna declare a new variable. Okay, this variable is to hold the last row with data. So dim, and let's say last row, or we can say new row as long. Okay, so this can be absolute number because the rows does not have decimal points. And here we can say new row is equal to, and then we can just copy this code. Okay, now we want to identify the last row that is totally based on this particular column. Okay, so watch out for that. If you follow this approach, if this cell is blank, for example, it's gonna overwrite this data, right? So you have, whenever you use this method, just choose the column where the data is not going to be blank, like the ID or the amount, something which is not going to be blank. And we also want to make sure that it's pointing to the right sheet. Always remember that. So I'm going to put data here. Okay, so from this data sheet, identify the last row with data question mark, just to read it. So now this is returning as the last row with data, so I'll put +1. This will be the next blank row. Okay, now coming down here, I'm gonna get rid of this loop. We do not want to loop anymore. We don't have to loop because we already know the row number where we can write to. Okay, so we don't even have to activate it now. I'm just gonna show you one more example. When we use with method, okay, with, and then you can specify the object, and then you can end with end with. Now when you follow this, you can, from this, instead of writing, you know, instead of writing this multiple times, the appropriate example also comes in here. For example, we can say with like this, and then we can say end with, and then I'm gonna indent all this code for now, except this one. This has to go out like this. And instead of specifying the name again and again, you can just say with this particular object dot range, so you can, you know, like start writing from where this has ended. Okay, so this is also another useful way to refer to objects and their properties. Okay, so now we are reading from this particular sheet, and these are the range that says a value to this. And coming down here, similarly we'll do it. Now if you're confused with anything, try to comment on the video, or if you're not comfortable with anything, feel free to email me, but the response could be delayed because of many other emails. Now coming down here, with this sheet, I'm gonna say dot cells, and then now I can specify the row that I want to write to, right? So this row, I want to write this row, and then to column 1, and then dot value is equal to, it's gonna be this. Okay, so similarly, I'm gonna replicate this. The row is gonna be same, but it's gonna be column 1, column 2, column 3, and column 4. So for example, column 1, column 2, column 3, column 4, the row is gonna be, we'll get the row from here. Okay, this is gonna dynamically return us the row, this one, right, like this. And then we want to set the value accordingly. So first is the client, the date, amount, and the client type. So this is more efficient way in this approach. We don't even have to go to this tab, activate it, or activate the cell, or select the cell. You can directly run it. Now I'm going to copy this one as well and put it down here, and so that we don't have to rewrite the same part of this object all the time. Okay, so that's the idea here. So just to make it look a little bit neat, I'm just doing this part. Okay, we'll just test this code. Okay, so I'm running this code now. Now you can also use local window, which is here, view and local window, to see the variables that it has like assigned to it. So in vclient it is assigned Amanda, in tdate it's assigned this date. See the date, it has hashtag in start and end. Okay, that's how you specify a value if you're passing it from here itself. And then the text, the string are have these double quotes in the corner, and the number does not. Okay, and then you can also see the type of data that you're using. So far we have not run this new row yet, so it still is 0. The moment we run this, it says the new row that it identify is row number 10. Okay, now if I run this, it's assigned a value there. One more, I'm pressing F8 by the way, and then client type. Okay, so this is a more efficient way to do it. So we are not activating or anything, we are directly saying from this particular sheet, assign all these variable values based on this, and then we are like with the second sheet here, we are also writing a value using the cells method of referring to the range. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it in this particular example. Let me just think. Now there are more type of variables, as you can see here. I'm just trying to see if I made some important ones. So yeah, whenever you get time, check the video description. I'm gonna leave this there, and then you can take a look at this, and if you have any questions, do let me know. One more thing I want to mention here is static variables. There are arrays as well. There are more things coming here. So static, when you use static, for example, like I think we did this already, that as soon as the code finishes down here, for example, I'm gonna press F9 here, I'm gonna put a breakpoint here, I'm gonna run it, so it stops here. And then if I look at the local window, it has all the variables. Okay, the moment I finish running this code, all these values are gonna be gone. If I go down here, so all these variables are gone. Now if we use static, it will it will have that in the memory. It will have that in the memory. Okay, so let's say static, and then we say let's call this clicks count, something like that. Okay, clicks count. Now this name can be anything. Okay, it doesn't have to be a correct spelling. As let's say long, again, long representing a number, a solid number. Now if I put this in the end, let's say Fox, okay, and I run this code now, so it says 0. Okay, sorry, I forgot to set a value. Count is equal to this plus 1. Okay, so I'm setting a value. Now I'm gonna run this. Now it's 1. If I run this, it says 2. That is because the value is still there in the memory. Okay, so this let's say that you want to record the number of times the user click on clicks count in that particular session. Before they close the workbook and reopen it, you can use this. Okay, so that is example of static variable. So now we've talked about static variable, we've talked about constant variable, public variable. Now when we talk about this public variable, even if you set in this, these are all private objects, right? If you specify a public, let's say public demo, something, public variable demo, and let's say that we set some value here, temp, we'll just call temp1, this is equal to version X, something like that. Now I'm gonna write, I ran it and I already assigned a value here. Okay, now if I try to print also, I won't be able to print it, though this is public. This is public only within this particular class. Similarly, if you type it in here, it's gonna be like that. So at the later stage, you'll come to know, once you do more code and get more exposure, this will become more relevant. At the moment, I think even if you are not, like well versed with this, it's totally okay. Now let me quickly show you about object variable. Okay, so for example, just gonna take one example, the last code that we wrote. So in here we are not referring to the sheets many times, but let's say that we want to set up a variable object which is a worksheet. Okay, so you can go on by dim, let's say sh as worksheet. Okay, and then whenever you set up these object variables, you have to use the word set, okay, to set up the object for that. So for example, I'm saying that sh is gonna be a variable, but the type is worksheet. Okay, now when I set this up, if I just say sh is gonna be sheets, and then you specify data like that for this particular sheet. Now if I run this, it's gonna give me an error. Okay, so for this type of object variables, you need to use the word set in the beginning. Okay, that's the only difference. So if I run this now, it's all good. So since here we are using object variable, the good practice is in the end of your code, just clear the memory by doing set sh equal to nothing, like that. Okay, so that's one way. Now we have set up this, we are saying that sh is gonna be data sheet. Okay, now instead of this data sheet, you can specify sh here like that. Okay, so that's one way to use object variable. Now I'm gonna give you one more example about the work, like object variable. So let's say that this data tab is not here, but it's in a different workbook. I'm gonna make a copy of this in a new workbook. Okay, so this is in the new workbook. I'm gonna save as to the same location. Desktop. I'm gonna save it here. This is gonna be XLSX. Okay, I'm not planning to store a macro there. Let's call this database, master data, whatever you want to call it. This is database, and then I'm gonna save it there. Now instead of writing it to our tab here, we're gonna write it to that workbook. Okay, for now I'm gonna maybe I'll make a copy of this in case we want to revert back. Okay, so I'm gonna hide this, and we'll start off by writing, we'll declare dim wb for workbook as workbook. We're saying that this wb variable is an object variable and the type is going to be workbook. Okay, now the first thing would be to open this workbook. Let's imagine this workbook is closed. Okay, so the way to set object variable, again, set, do you use the word set equal to, and then workbooks. Remember we've gone through this in our lesson. The way to refer to this workbook, there are many of them, right? Workbooks, and then you can add the workbook, you can like refer by name and so on. Now we already have the full path of that file, so we will refer in that fashion. So here equal to, and then workbooks dot, and then you can see all the methods that you can use this with this workbook. Now we want to open that workbook, so I'm gonna, you see these symbols, these are methods, open, and as you open the bracket you'll be able to see all the parameters that you can pass for this particular method. All the ones where you see these brackets are optional, but this one is not. Okay, so the file name is compulsory. Now I'm gonna go here, this is the file I just saved. I'm gonna press shift and right click on this and then copy as path. Now I'm gonna come back here, I'm gonna paste it here. Okay, now you can also set up another space here and say, okay, paste it to this, read the file path from here as well. For now I'm gonna hard code it here, and then as you put comma you can say, if you want to get, if you don't want to get a prompt update links and all when you open the file, then you can set like false, and then as you put a comma, do you want to open read only? No, so it's gonna be false, and then so on. So if you have a password, this is where you'll specify the password, something like this. But since we do not have the password for that file, I'm just gonna leave it as this. Okay, so for now I'm just gonna leave it till here. Okay, so we have set up the workbook here. So this part is gonna open the workbook, and automatically as soon as the workbook is open, it should be activated, but just to make sure, I'm just gonna say activate this book. Now initially this particular sheet data is still here in our workbook, in this workbook, but we do not want to refer to that, so I'm gonna say this WB, we're gonna refer to the data sheet from this particular file, and then the rest will remain the same. This part is already, probably you can set the value up here before we open the workbook. Okay, and then this part can go up here. So try to go slow, type everything yourself, try to understand this. This part is actually very important. And then so here we are specifying open this workbook, and we pass in the full file name, and false and false. Update links false, read only is false. We want to open in write mode, and we're setting up the sheet, and then we are referring to that particular sheet and identifying their last row with data, and then we pass the value, write the value there, and then we come back to this workbook. We can say we can make sure this workbook dot activate, and then write the status, and then we'll do similar thing for workbook as well. Workbook equal to nothing. Now before that we have to close the workbook again, workbook dot close, and then here you specify, do you want to save as, do you want to save changes? Yes, we want to save the changes. I'll just say the true. Okay, now let's debug this, go line by line by pressing F8 and see how it works out. So this part we've already gone through, just signing the values. Now this part is opening up the file. Yeah, as you can see, the file is already open, and then go on this line, it's able to set up the sheet, and then it got row number 17 as the last row, which is correct, this one, and then it writes the value there, and then it comes back here and then writes the value of execution status, which is here, as you can see, and then sets the sheet to nothing. It closed the workbook, as you can see down here, it's gone, and then the click. Okay, I'm gonna save this. If I go back here and open this workbook, you can see the last data that was entered. Now let's put another name, maybe and then I'm gonna put in type B, and okay, so our code is different now. I'm gonna put version 3 code here. I'm just gonna open and verify, so you can see it is added. Okay, so that is how you can refer to set up object variables. Now you've learned how to set up object variables. So similarly, like in the future, I'm gonna cover more topics, but if you start working with other applications, then you are gonna point to those applications in this similar method, okay, in this similar way. What else can we do here? Now coming back to our form, let's say that we want to submit the data only when all these fields are filled out. Let's say that these are mandatory fields, especially this three, and this can be actually, if you're actually working on actual, like real life, probably you will only fill the data which is absolutely necessary, and the rest of the attributes should be in a mapping cube. And then later on, when you do your like reporting, that's where you're gonna collect all the related information about that particular transaction, and then you do your reporting out of that. So let's say that we want to ensure these fields are filled out before they can submit the data. For that, we can use if else. Okay, so just demonstrate that, I'm gonna add another module. Now this is our final submit example. Okay, so it's important to name it. For now I'm not doing it, but if you're actually doing a project, just keep it structured properly. It will help you in the long run. So coming down here, let's talk about if. Let's call this ifs demo. So before we can actually even go in there, there are something called just give me 1 second, called operators. It's very simple, but I just want to show you the table again. Okay, so these are operators that you can use to compare data. Okay, so for example, if I go in here and I say question mark 10 is greater than 9, it's going to return true. 10 is equal to 9, it's going to return false. 10 is greater than or equal to 5, true. Okay, so this is ways to do data comparison. So for example, let's say that we want to check if the cell value here is blank. So I can say, I can check by, you already know this, range, and you specify the range dot value is equal to, let's say we want to check if the cell value is let's say Dana is false. So if I say is Shelly, returns true, right? And let's say is equal to, if it is blank, nothing, it's not blank. So if I remove this and if I do this, it returns true. Okay, so this way you can validate your cells if it has a value or not. So for example, if I say the syntax, the statement is if this then, so this is our expression, this is our logic that we want to check if it is true or false, and you use then and then and if. Okay, now if this is blank, let's say we want to print this out and say it is blank, else it is not blank. Okay, so if I run this now, it is blank. So if I bring it back, yeah, it is not blank. Okay, now if you want to add more ifs condition here, you can just replicate this line, example else, and then you put if. Else if, here let's say that you want to check something else. If this let's say you want to check the the len will be the characters count in this cell. If len of this is greater than 10, then something like that. Let's say that this is supposed to be employee ID, and employee ID, like the count of employee ID is supposed to be 10 digits only, or let's say 7. You can validate in this similar fashion as well. So for example, as soon as the condition is met, it's going to go to the end if part. Okay, so start is going to validate. If the first condition is not met, it's going to go further and keep on checking till a certain condition is met. Okay, so let's say I put it is greater than 7, len is greater than 7, something like that, lesser than or equal to 7, something like that, and else. So if any of these conditions are not met, it's going to come down here and run else part. So if I debug this, less than or equal to 7. Okay, this is the count of character is less than or equal to 7. So that is just an example of how you can refer to the range, validate if certain condition is true or false, only then you execute the code. So coming back to our final code here, let's say that we want to validate and make sure this part, like all these 3 of them are like filled out. For that, you can directly write if here as well. For example, here we can put a validation. If this is equal to blank, then now if it is blank, we want to give him a feedback message box, and we can tell client name is missing. Now if you want to add a new line, we can just say $VB new line. You can use this, and if your line becomes too long, you can just put underscore space enter. Okay, then it will continue the line. And here I can say please check and try again, something like that. And the message box type, we want it to be critical. We want to warn them something is missing. And here we can use our variable app name, right? App name is going to be Excel app. Yeah. And then if this is the case, we want to exit sub. Exit sub means if you write this code, if this condition is true, meaning if this is blank, it's going to prompt the user. After that, it's going to exit sub, meaning it will directly go here. Okay. Now let's run this. It has a value, so it went through. Okay. Now let's say I remove this and run again. It says client name is missing. Please check and try again. This is the app name, and then now if I press F8 again, it goes, it exits subs. Okay. Now that is the new thing that I just introduced. Now if you want to, let's say that you're running code and then you call another function which is still running, and you want to end the entire code thread, regardless, you can use end. Okay, this will end everything. Okay, but for now, don't worry about it. Once we have relevant examples, we'll come there. So one way is to use this and validate if this cell is missing, and then you can directly give a feedback. Or what you can do, you can move this part to another function. Okay, for that I'm just gonna come down here. I'm just gonna insert a function. I never use this, but there is a way to enter a function here like this. So private or public. So public, we want it to be public. Let's say error validation error count, something like that. And okay, so here it enter a new placeholder, new function, and I'm gonna put this code here. And now we can, since we already know about the data type, now we can also specify what sort of, this particular valid function is going to return. Okay, so for example, let's say I want to return a byte, because we're just going to use for validation, so I'm going to put byte. Now I'm going to keep it like that, and then I'm going to say dim error count as byte, and then I'm going to say error count is equal to error count plus 1. So I'm going to increment every time the required field is missing. Okay, now I'm going to replicate this for pdate and then for amount. Now we're not going to check for client type because that is not mandatory. Okay, so by the time it reaches here, you can specify what this function is going to return. Okay, so you say equal to, and then error count. It's going to return the error count. Now when it comes here, again, you can use with method here that we've learned, with, and then and with here as well. So get rid of this. Okay, now when you start doing the recording of macros, it's all gonna make sense now, because you're already familiar with syntax, you're familiar with method, how to refer to objects, their properties and all. Now coming back to our function, so we're saying this variable error count, the name error count, is gonna hold data type, which is byte. Byte will have a data till 255. We're just gonna store 3 values maximum, right? So if client value is blank, the error count is gonna be 1. If date is also blank, it's gonna be 2, and then if amount is also blank, it's gonna be 3. Okay, now if I go back to our code, I'm gonna put here if this error count is greater than 1, oh sorry, greater than 0, then we want to exit sub, and then I'll say, okay, we already removed the message box, no worries, we'll retype it. Validation failed. Please ensure all mandatory fields are filled out. And then VB critical again, and then app name. Let's try it. I'm gonna assign. Did we already assign it? Okay, we already did. Now I'm gonna run it. It says validation failed. I'm gonna put Peter and remove this. It's gonna fail. Put a date. It's gonna fail, and I put a value. Now it should go through. Yeah. Okay. Now we don't need to know the count of number of times we've already clicked this button. So that is a way to use like if, and then again refer back to the example we demonstrated. If this is true, it's gonna stop checking for this, and then it's gonna go directly down here. But in this scenario, we want to ensure that all the fields are checked and the error count are returned. We're gonna talk about error handling and like other best practices in our following videos. For now, I want you to type all this code out yourself. You want to in your own project folder, and then the assignment is gonna be that. I'm gonna show you more examples, but the assignment will be to send the data from here by putting a validation. You submit the data, it goes to the new file called database, and then it saves the file down there. Okay, that is going to be assignment for this particular data type. Now one more thing for select case statement, right? Select case statement is useful when you have more conditions. I mean, here we have like specific few ones that we want to check and then execute in a certain way. Now all of these are equally important. The scenario will present itself and then you'll come to know which one to use. But for example here, let's say that we have a region or something, and then based on the region, let's say that if the client is from certain area, we want to apply certain discount or something like that. You can put certain exception to that. Now let's say that you want to put an exception to let's say 20 regions. It will not be feasible to type like if, you know, like all these scenarios, if this then do that. So we can use a select case statement for that. Or let's say we want to restrict the users from running on specific day, or you want to do certain thing based on the number of weekdays. So select case statement becomes very useful in that term. I'm gonna add one more tab here. Now let's say that here is a date, and so the select case example will be, let's say that we want to run certain thing based on B2, and I'll say dim my date as date, and then we'll say my date is equal to B2, dot value. Okay, and then let me just first debug this code. So you basically need to know the usages when the, you know, a scenario presents. At first, you know, like it might not make too much sense, but then down the line it's gonna make a lot of sense. So I'm gonna debug, it's gonna print that. Okay, so based on this my date, we're gonna do a select case statement. So select case and this, and then and select. So it's like if and then and if, like that. Okay, so we're saying our select case is this. Based on this, we're gonna assign more conditions in here. For example, if the case is, let's say on Saturday and Sunday we do not want the code to run or something, so we can say if we can say weekday. Okay, and then based on weekday here, just leaving everything as default, you can specify what is going to be the first day and all. So let's say our first day here, first day of the week is Sunday by default, or if you want it to be Monday, for example. And if you want 6 or 7, if it is 6 and 7, then we can. And if it is 1 to 5, it's gonna be weekday. And case else also can be here if you want. Others, I mean there cannot be other day, but just to give you. So it says it's weekend, 25 is weekend. If I do text of this, Saturday. Now if I change this date to 22, it should return us it's a weekday. 20, or let's say 17. F5 or just run it, still says weekday. And if I put 18, it's gonna be Saturday, should give us weekend. Okay, so for example, the good thing about here is like you can specify a range like 1 to 5, for example, directly. Here you can specify 6, 7. You can even specify, for example, all your text values if you have something to validate, if it is t or if it is x, something like that, you can have this part of the code run here. Okay, tx example. Now on top of my head, you can also, for example, let's say that if the user is saving as the file, let's say you prompt the user to select the file, and then the user is supposed to select only the Excel file and select something else. So you can put a case here that if it is Excel, then you want to import the data differently, right? If it is the text file they select, you want to import in a different method. So you can pass maybe different codes based on the file they select. If the extension is, let's say, XLS or XLSX and so on. So in the future, it's going to present a scenario to you for sure, and then at that time you can use it. Okay, so that's another way to you know, like instead of alternate for using if statement. Now a couple of other important points. Let's give me a moment. One more thing about if, for example, here you want to check multiple conditions, you can also specify in this fashion. You can put and if your condition is and if both the condition has to be met, you can also specify something like that. Okay, if you have more conditions, you keep on adding them here like that. Okay, it should be okay to go in this fashion as well. And if you have only one condition, for example, let's say that if going back to our form, let's say that if the client type is something, you want to, you know, like apply a certain condition or something. So we can also say if client type is equal to, let's say, type B, you can, in the same line, you can assign a value. For example, let's say there is exception 1, so you can say true or false, something like that. You can directly assign a value, or you can directly show a message box here. Okay, so that's another way to, you know, like for if there is only one condition or certain condition you can pass in one straight line, this is a way to do it. And if you have at a later stage, it might present you that let's say that you want to directly assign a value based on a similar approach. Let's say this is let's say dim CLT type as boolean. This will only take in true or false, and we want to check CLT type A, something like that. Now let's say we want to set a value of this true or false. You can also use if. Okay, in this you can directly pass the expression here, your condition, and then you can set true or false. Okay, so for example, let's say that if range this value is equal to true, okay, you can specify true, else false. Okay, so for example, if I debug this code now, oops. So this return false because this is client type is B. Now if I change this and then do this, it's going to return true. Okay, that's another example of if in the if part. I might forget later, so I just want to quickly remind you about that now. Now I'm gonna remind, I forgot to mention one important thing. Now since we start working on variables, there is one option that you can enable now called require variable declaration. Okay, now check this box. I'll tell you why. For example, one thing is every time you add a new module or a new object, it's gonna add option explicit. Okay, so it will force you to declare a variable. So for example, that way like your code is more efficient, more structured. And for example, if I go in back here, let's say that I did not declare a variable. I'm just gonna copy option explicit and put it there, up there, here, like that. Now it tells me, okay, variable is not defined. Okay, so that way it forces you to declare a variable. The other thing is, let's say that initially you start declaring like a variable called vcline, but then when you assign, somehow you type by mistake v, like without t. So it tells you, okay, there is like the variable is not defined. That's how you come to know, okay, there is a spelling mistake. So it keeps a check as well. So keep before you start working on this exercise or assignment or this practice, just check this box and keep it on going forward. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna leave in the video description the link where you can go and further refer to all this data type, and then also about the operators. For example, we have discussed a bit on using and instead of and. You can also use or, and then there are things like not, is, and then for example XOR, not plus or, for example, and then divide, multiply, and all this. So very quickly for all this, like when you do the calculation, for example, if you have to multiply, you use star, that, right? And then if you want to add a number, you use plus sign, and it goes self-explanatory, but very quickly I want to divide by this. In the VBA you can also like use this, for example, to return integer, okay, without decimal points. So let's say that it will still return you 3 without decimal. Otherwise, if you do 10 divided by 3, it's gonna give you this accurate result. But in case you want to just return the the solid number, you can use that. And then what else? So this, and then yep, you can also do something like that, exponential, modular, and all this. Okay, so all these are here in this particular page. We already talked about ampersand is just to concatenate the string. If you use this, then even the numbers will be like converted to string. As we go on, we are going to use all these examples, all the text functions as well. Again, when you like use all these new methods, you can also press F2 and then open up your object browser, and then you can see more about it. And I think as far as the data type is concerned, or variables, we have covered most of the important topic. So for example, I'm gonna click on long. Now when people are like very experienced, they start using symbols like this as well. So you can like if you see symbols like that in declaration, don't get confused. It's basically just means long. For example, this same code can be declared like this as well, dim new row s, like this as well. So this means that it can be represented by ampersand as well. And then you can say new row is equal to like this as well. It will not error. Okay. Similarly for integer, and then for percent, I mean for integer, for others as well, there will be a symbol that you can use like this. Sign is used instead. Okay. Now one last thing I want to show you is the user defined, and then I'll show you one example maybe of how to like work with Excel object again, and then we'll end the session. And remember, the assignment for this time is to replicate sending the data from this particular form to the external workbook, and save, and then you open it. And then the second assignment will be, I'll send more details over the email. Second assignment will be to replicate this form. Okay. And then instead of submit, it will be pull data. So once you pull data, it's gonna go and then filter the data. Okay, filter out the data from the external file and import it here to a sheet called imported data. Okay, so that's 2 assignments for this time. Now going back, before we wind up, I'll show you example of user-defined data type. So all these are all the system-defined inbuilt data type. If you want to create your own user-defined, you can also do that. Okay, so going back here, this is actually advanced topic, but this is not difficult at all. Just it helps a lot, especially when you're building a huge, like complex data, application or model, and you want to structure your code very properly, so that like maintaining it, validating it, and everything becomes much easier. So for example, let's say that you want to create your own data type. You can start by using the word type. Okay, and then you specify your data type. So let's say that we want to create our data type for our input form. So maybe you can call transaction, something like that. I'll just call this transaction info, something like that. Okay, and then you end this with an type. Okay, and here you specify what will be the additional properties. For example, here first will be, I'm just gonna client, date, amount. So first will be, let's say, client, and then second is client is gonna be string, and then client type is also going to be string, and then we have transaction date as date, and then the amount as currency. Okay, now it will all make sense once we implement this. So now we can declare down here I'm just gonna back this code here, and coming back here, I'm gonna change this to version 4, and I'm gonna declare a new variable here, and then we're gonna use this transaction info. This is our data type, the customized data type. So dim my data or form data, or we can just say inputs as this. Okay, transaction info, and then you can here, instead of vclient and all this, you can directly do this dot client is equal to, you can specify in this fashion. Okay, so this way is also totally fine, but if you want it to be more structured, this way is also easier to read as well. Input dot client, then next is going to be input dot here the date, input dot amount dot type. So you can also follow this approach, type, amount, and the date. Okay, so I'm gonna comment this out for now. And now you have to implement similarly here as well. So for example, I'm gonna comment this out and paste it here, and then we're just gonna use this dot client dot date dot amount and then type. Okay, so let me run this. Okay, let me put a new data here. Let's say Andrew. So it opened the file and saved the file back. So Andrew, so this is passed here. Okay, so you can also create your own data type in this fashion. Smart structure looks better. It's easier to refer to as well, read as well. So you can also go by that method. But I'll leave up to you in order to implement this. When you do your assignment, you can either do this or that. But I'll definitely encourage you to type out all this, especially now that you're learning. So that when the situation presents, you can, you know, like type, code like a professional. Okay, and I think that's gonna be pretty much it for now. Again, you can start recording. I'm not really gonna cover on recording, but recording is very neat feature. You can definitely try out yourself. For example, let's say I just want to put a color to the headers. Here I'm going here, I'm gonna, so you can see like the recorder have started. You can see the stop recording sign. Everything that you're gonna do is gonna be recorded, so just watch out for that. I normally use recorder, you know, like when you have to really when you don't want to type it, it doesn't make sense for you to type when you can easily record certain thing. For example, putting the header, changing the color, copying and pasting, opening the file, filtering it out, and so on. So we'll do more examples. Now if I go in here, you'll see like it has selected this range. Width, we've already learned about width. Now width selection is whatever was selected. Dot interior is putting all these properties and then selecting this. Well, similarly, if I select this cell, it says sheets this dot select. Yeah, so now you're already familiar with all this. It should be very easy for you. Now let's say that you want to quickly generate some statement, all these boiler codes they call it. You can, you know, like use this recorder, very useful. Now I'm gonna just insert a pivot table out of this data. Select the range pivot table and okay. So now this is our pivot table, this by client type, and then the amount. Let's say we want to just view it by in that way, and let's say that we want to create a macro or a program to automatically update this particular table when we click the button. So for example, we can, you know, like if you're not familiar with objects, also you can directly record this. You can go in here, pivot tools, and then you just assign a value, for example 17, just to see the syntax. Okay, and then I'm gonna stop recording. And as you come back here, you'll see active sheet, pivot tables. Pivot table name is this. So once you click here, you can see pivot table is here, and then it changed the cache, pivot cache, cache, and then active workbook, and this part is basically the address. Okay, so let's say that you want to manipulate this now. You can just get rid of this. Pivot source update, something like that. And again, the way you refer to pivots, charts, all this, you can put a index number, you can specify the name. Okay, it's up to you. As we come down here, we don't have to change any of this. The only thing we need to change is here. So it is within the file, so you can just get rid of this part. Now if you look here, this is in R1C1 method, row 1 column 1, row 17 column 4, right? So this 17 is only thing that we need to change now. So since we already know how to identify the last row, instead of 17, I'm gonna get rid of 17, and then I'm gonna concatenate these two addresses like this, and here I'm gonna put last row with data. Okay, now if we go back here, this is the one with last row with data. I'm gonna come down here and I'm going to say dim last row with data as long, and then with this particular sheet, data sheet, just give me 1 second, LR is equal to, we don't need to specify the workbook because we're referring to this current workbook, and then this LR will come in here instead of 17, which was hard-coded. Every time there's a new data, it's gonna pick it up. And here we don't need +1 because we just need to pick up the last row with data actually. Now if we try to run this, let's say we put a button and run this, it updates. Now if I come back here and let's say that I copy paste the data and I change the client type here to C, it should automatically pick up when I click here. So type C is here. If you verify it from here, you'll see that it has changed the source to 31. Okay, so I'll encourage you to play around, record it, do all sorts of things, try to import txt data, try to connect to other sources, try the loops that we have practiced. In the coming video I'll do more examples on the loop, working with other external data. I'll also start showing you how to refer to web pages, controls, for example. So we'll do more examples, but before you can go on to that, you need to practice this video very carefully. Send all your work that you have done, the assessment, and then based on that I'll do the next video. Okay, so guys, that's gonna be all for this lesson. We have covered a lot of things today. Again, I encourage you to go through, pause the video, type out the codes, and get familiar with all this. Okay, so I'm trying to cover as much as possible and bring you up to speed. Now if you send me your assignments, then I'll send you the following videos, and if you have your friends who is interested, they can still sign up. Check the link for the sign up in the video description. Again, all this link that we've used, I'm gonna add this in the video description. They are very useful. Go there, there will be lots of examples, and definitely you have to get familiar with the syntaxes, so type it out. And then if you have any questions, please comment on the video. And then if you have any special requests or any thing you want to discuss further, do email me as well. That should be okay. Again, thank you so much for following this series, and I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Have a great weekend. Bye bye.